He dismissed her before they met. She heard every word. Then she sat across from him and negotiated him into the ground, politely. Thornfield Vale in October was not a place that flattered newcomers. The moor pressed in from three sides. The light arrived grey and left early, and the village had the particular stillness of a community that had been watching strangers make errors for 400 years and saw no reason to intervene. Miss Cecilia Vane had arrived in April, which was marginally kinder, and had spent 6 months learning which errors to avoid and which the village would simply have to absorb. She had purchased Larkmoor Cottage outright, not leased purchased, which was the first error in the village's estimation because women of her station did not generally purchase property. They inherited it, or they married into it, or they made do with a comfortable arrangement through a male relation. Miss Vane had a solicitor in Leeds, a banker in London, and no male relation willing to take credit for either. This was the second error. The third was that she did not appear to know she was making any. She was 31 years of age, with dark hair pinned with competence rather than art, and a quality of attention in her grey eyes that made people feel their sentences were being evaluated before they finished them. She wore good cloth and kept her own hours and had been seen twice, walking the boundary of Ember Flat with a notebook. She kept a housekeeper, a Mrs. Aldgate, stout and unimpressed by most things, who provided the minimum required architecture of respectability and asked no questions about the notebook. The village noted all of this and withheld judgment. It was, after all, only October. The purchase of Ember Flat had been completed on the 14th of October through Mr. Samuel Greer of Greer & Associates, Solicitors, Harrogate. Cecilia had commissioned a survey in August, reviewed the title history in September, and made her offer in the first week of October at a price that was fair, documented and accepted within 48 hours by the seller, a Mr. Fortescue of Harrogate, who had owned the parcel for 11 years without doing anything useful with it and was glad to be rid of it. The survey sat on her writing desk at Larkmoor Cottage, rolled and tied with brown cord. It showed Ember Flat in precise detail, 12 acres of level ground between the Carnmore eastern boundary and the Larkmoor Brook, with elevations marked at 6-inch intervals and 2 annotations in the surveyor's hand, noting the locations of existing drainage channels. One channel was adequate. The other was blocked, which explained the seasonal flooding in the field's northwest corner, and if the contour lines were to be believed, in the 2 tenant farms that lay beyond the Carnmore boundary wall. Cecilia had read the survey with the attention she gave to everything she read, which was considerable. She understood what the blocked channel meant. She had factored it into her offer price and into her plans for the following spring. She had not, at the time of purchase, known that the Duke of Carnmore had plans for Ember Flat of his own. She learned this from Mrs. Harriet Foss on the 20th of October, over tea in Mrs. Foss's front parlour, where the fire was slightly too large for the grate, and the conversation was always slightly too large for the stated topic. "The Duke," said Mrs. Foss, pouring with the ease of a woman who had delivered significant intelligence over teacups for 40 years, "has been meaning to reacquire that field for 3 years at least. His steward, Mr. Peel, you'll have seen him, tall man, looks permanently aggrieved. Mr. Peel has been writing to Mr. Fortescue every spring. Fortescue always said no, and now you've gone and bought it." Cecilia accepted her cup. "I have." "The Duke will not be pleased. Is he generally the sort of man who makes his displeasure felt?" Mrs. Foss gave the question the respect it deserved by thinking before answering. "He's the sort of man who expects the world to arrange itself according to his requirements and is genuinely baffled when it doesn't. He's not cruel about it. He simply cannot conceive of the alternative." She paused. "He will come to call, I expect, or he will send Peel." Cecilia went home, unrolled her survey and spent an hour reading it again. He sent Peel. Mr. Aldous Peel arrived at Larkmoor Cottage on the 23rd of October at 11 in the morning. He presented the Duke's compliments. He noted that His Grace had a long-standing interest in the parcel known as Ember Flat. He inquired, with the careful phrasing of a man who had written the question out beforehand, whether Miss Vane might be open to a discussion regarding a possible transfer of the title. Mrs. Aldgate had shown him into the sitting-room and now stood at the kitchen doorway steady as furniture, requiring nothing and missing nothing. Cecilia offered Peel tea. He declined. She sat down and said, "The field is not for sale, Mr. Peel, but please convey my compliments to His Grace and assure him the land will be well managed." Peel's posture indicated this was not the answer he had anticipated. His Grace would be prepared to offer a generous premium above your purchase price. I'm certain he would. The field is still not for sale. Perhaps if I were to explain the particular importance of the parcel to His Grace's drainage scheme. I understand the drainage scheme, Cecilia said. The blocked channel in the northwest quadrant, if cleared and extended 20 yards to the east, would resolve the flooding in his tenant farms at considerably less expense than any title transfer. You might mention that as well. Peel looked at her with the expression of a man who had come expecting a brief errand and found something else entirely. I will relay your position to His Grace, he said. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Peel. He relayed her position. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Carnmore, received Peel's report in the study of Carnmore Hall on the evening of the 23rd, while standing at the window that faced east, which faced, though he did not dwell on this, the general direction of Ember Flat. He listened without interrupting. He processed information quickly and responded slowly, having learned early that the reverse was a pattern he could not afford. When Peel finished, Edmund said, She knows about the drainage scheme. She cited the Northwest Channel specifically, Your Grace. And she won't sell. She was not, in my estimation, equivocating. Edmund turned from the window. The study held survey maps, estate maps, agricultural charts, pinned and rolled and stacked with the organized intensity of a man who believed that if he understood the land well enough, the land would cooperate. There was a map of Ember Flat among them, 20 years old, commissioned by his father's surveyor. He knew every line of it. What is she like? He asked. Peel considered this with more care than the question might ordinarily have warranted. Composed, he said. Precise. She had already thought through most of what I was likely to say before I said it. She mentioned the blocked channel. And its extension. 20 yards east, the figure struck me as accurate. It is accurate. Edmund set down the Ember Flat survey. What do we know about her? Miss Cecilia Vane. Arrived in the Vale in April. She purchased Larkmoor Cottage in her own name. Her solicitor is Greer in Harrogate. Her banker is in London. She appears to have independent means. She is unmarried. She is said to be well-read. Well-read, Edmund repeated with a flatness that managed to contain an entire position. So I am told, Your Grace. Edmund looked at the map. Women don't understand land, he said, not unkindly, not angrily, with the mild certainty of a man stating a category of fact. She's made a sound purchase, and she's pleased with herself. Give her a month and she'll find the management more than she bargained for. We'll approach again in the spring. Peel nodded and withdrew. What neither of them knew was that Cecilia Vane was in the outer office of Greer and Associates in Harrogate at that moment, having arrived for a separate appointment and been shown to the waiting area while Mr. Greer finished with a prior client. The prior client's steward had been shown into the adjoining consultation room. The partition between the waiting area and the consultation room was solid enough for propriety and inadequate for sound, a fact Mr. Greer had noted with embarrassment on previous occasions and had not yet remedied. She had heard Peel's account. She had heard Edmund's questions, which she found more interesting than she had expected. And she had heard the conclusion, women don't understand land, stated with the mild certainty of a man settling a minor point of fact. She sat very still for a moment. Then she took out her notebook and wrote down the date, the time and the exact wording. When Mr. Greer's clerk appeared to show her in, she thanked him pleasantly, tucked the notebook away and went to review the title documents for a small parcel of meadowland she was considering in the next valley. On the road home, she unrolled the thought the way she would unroll a map, examined it, and decided what to do with it. Nothing for now, which was not passivity but strategy, and she knew the difference. He came on the 28th of October without Peel. This was the first indication he had taken the situation more seriously than his initial response suggested. Peel was efficient, but he was also a signal. The deployment of a steward said, "This is a transaction, and you are not important enough for my direct attention." The Duke, arriving himself on horseback alone on a grey Tuesday morning, said something else. Cecilia was in the garden pulling up the last of the autumn kale when the horse came up the lane. She did not go inside to change. She stripped off her gardening gloves and tucked them in her apron pocket and waited. He dismounted with the ease of a man who had been on horseback since childhood. Tall, dark-haired, wearing riding clothes that were well cut and unremarkable, the particular fashion of men who do not need clothes to establish their importance. He looked at her directly when he approached. Some men of his rank aimed their eyes a foot above the person they were addressing. He did not. "Miss Vane, I am Carnmore. Forgive the hour." "It is 11 in the morning," Cecilia said. "There is nothing to forgive." A pause. She had the impression she had already done something he hadn't anticipated. "I wonder if we might speak," he said. "I expect you've come about Ember Flat." "I have." "Then we might as well go and look at it." She stripped off her apron and set it on the garden wall. "It is more useful than speaking about it from my parlour." He looked at her, the small recalibration of a man presented with an option he hadn't considered. Then, "Very well." Mrs. Aldgate appeared in the cottage doorway as they left, observed the direction they were taking, and returned inside. The field was visible from the lane. It was sufficient. The walk to Ember Flat took 12 minutes by the field path. Cecilia walked at her usual pace, and Edmund fell into step beside her, with the adaptability of a man who understood that following was undignified. They did not speak for the first 5 minutes. The path ran along the eastern edge of the Larkmoor property, and then through a stile into the field itself. Cecilia went over the stile first. Edmund went over it after her without comment. Ember Flat in late October was a landscape of flattened grass and exposed chalk, with the brook running low along its southern edge, and the Carnmore boundary wall running straight and grey along the north. In the northwest corner, the ground was darker, wetter. The blocked channel ran through it as a slight depression in the turf. Cecilia walked toward it without explanation. Edmund followed. "There," she said. Edmund looked. "The channel has been blocked for at least 8 years. Fortescue did nothing about it. Your tenant farms flood each spring because the water table in this quadrant has no exit. The channel, if cleared and extended 20 yards east, would resolve it." He looked at her. "Peel mentioned you said 20 yards. 20 yards and 4 inches. The contour drops half an inch per yard between here and the field boundary. The extension needs to reach the secondary brook, or it simply moves the problem." "You had a survey done," he said. "Before I purchased, naturally." Fortescue's solicitor said the parcel was surveyed in 1801. "That was the ducal survey. I commissioned a current one in August because I do not purchase land without knowing what I am purchasing. May I ask who surveyed it?" "Mr. George Hartley of Leeds. He is, I believe, the surveyor your estate uses for the eastern moorland." This landed. She saw it, a small but visible adjustment in his posture. "Yes," he said, "he is." "Then you will be familiar with the accuracy of his work." The wind moved through the grass. Edmund looked at the wet ground, at the blocked channel, and then at her. "You are not going to sell," he said. "No, even though the field is of substantially more use to me than it is to you. That is your assessment, it is not mine." He studied her, not at the category of person he had assigned her to, but at the specific person in front of him. "What use is it to you?" he asked. "I intend to clear the channel, drain the northwest corner, and lease the field to a grazier. The return will be modest but sound. It does not need to be of substantial use to me, Your Grace. It only needs to be worth what I paid for it." "And the drainage on my land?" "Is your land. You are welcome to extend the channel on your side of the wall. The work on my side I will undertake independently." He was quiet. The moor held its silence around them. "I had expected," Edmund said, "that this would be simpler." "Most things are simpler," Cecilia said, "when there is no one on the other side." He knew it was accurate. He appeared to have no argument with accuracy. They walked back to Larkmoor Cottage in the same arrangement, side by side, no deference on either part. At the garden gate he stopped. "Miss Vane, I should like to call again if you are willing to continue this conversation." "The conversation or the negotiation?" He held her gaze. "I am no longer certain they are different things." She opened the garden gate. "Good morning, Your Grace." He rode away. She watched him go, which she had not intended to do. He called again on the 1st of November. This time she was in her study, which was what she called the back room of Larkmoor Cottage, a designation that had surprised Mrs. Foss considerably when she first heard it. It held a writing desk, 3 walls of bookshelves, a good fire, and the survey of Ember Flat, currently unrolled on the desk and annotated in 3 different inks. She heard the horse. She rolled up the survey and went to the front room. He had brought his own map, rolled the paper yellowed at the edges, tied with dark green cord. Older than hers. She noted this. Your Grace," she said, "come in." He came in. He looked at the room with the contained curiosity of a man too well bred to look openly, which meant he looked at everything while appearing to look at nothing. He registered the books, the fire, the absence of the decorative clutter that was supposed to characterize a woman's sitting room. Mrs. Aldgate appeared from the kitchen, set a tea tray on the side table with the unhurried efficiency of someone demonstrating that nothing unusual was occurring, and withdrew. "I have brought our estate survey of Ember Flat," Edmund said, holding the roll. "I thought it useful that we work from the same document." "We are not working from the same document," Cecilia said. "We have two different documents, which is the problem." He paused. "I had hoped—" "Your survey is 20 years old. Mine is 3 months old. They will not match. Your document records what was. Mine records what is." He set the map on the table, unrolled it, weighted the corners with his hat and her inkwell, which she allowed without comment. He looked at it, then at her. "Will you show me yours?" She went to the study, returned with her survey, set it beside his. She weighted her corners with a small book and the desk scissors. They stood on opposite sides of the table and looked at both maps. The difference was immediately apparent. His showed Ember Flat's northwest boundary, running along a line that her survey showed had shifted 12 feet south following a drainage collapse in approximately 1808. The boundary wall, which both maps agreed upon, was therefore in a different position relative to the land than his document recorded. Edmund was quiet for a long time. "The boundary wall," he said, "was rebuilt in 1809. Fortescue's records confirm it. The replacement was positioned correctly according to the original deed survey, which predates your father's 1801 commission. The 1801 survey is the one my solicitor holds as authoritative. I know, that is why I commissioned a new one." He looked at the two maps, then at her. "You knew this before you purchased." "I suspected it. When I saw Hartley's drainage annotations, I suspected the boundary line might also have discrepancies. You came to this negotiation knowing my position was based on an inaccurate document. I came knowing mine was based on an accurate one." He looked at her. "That is a distinction I find it difficult to argue with. Most accurate distinctions are." He almost smiled. It came and went too quickly to be certain. He looked back at the maps, his hands flat on the table, closer to her survey than to his own. "The 20 yards and 4 inches, he said. "Yes. If the channel were cleared and extended, by both parties from their respective sides of the boundary, the flooding resolves and the northwest corner of your field becomes productive. That is my assessment. And the cost of the extension on my side falls to my estate." "And on my side to me," Cecilia said. "Yes, that is how property law generally works." This time she was quite certain. He almost smiled. "I had been operating on the assumption that the most efficient resolution was acquisition." "It generally is," Cecilia said, "when the other party is willing to sell." "And when they are not?" "Then one considers whether cooperation might produce a comparable outcome at lower cost." "Are you proposing cooperation, Miss Vane?" "I am observing that it is an option. You are the one who came to call." He left an hour later, both maps taken away for comparison by their respective solicitors. Cecilia stood in the front room after he had gone and looked at the table where both surveys had been unrolled together, the space their corners had shared, the strange intimacy of two documents laid side by side in the grey November light. She had expected a man more straightforwardly manageable, more bluster, more condescension, easier to deflect. She had prepared for the dismissiveness. She had not prepared for the precision, nor for the way he looked at the maps, as though they were a problem he genuinely wanted to solve, rather than an obstacle between himself and something he intended to possess. She was still not selling, she was very clear on that. But she was looking forward to the next conversation. She did not write this down. The solicitors were in communication for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, November settled over Thornfield Vale with its customary lack of sentiment. Cecilia read, walked the boundary of Ember Flat twice, cleared preliminary debris from the western end of the blocked channel with Bates, and attended Mrs. Foss's card party. She was seated next to Lord Gideon Ashworth, the Duke's younger brother, who introduced himself with such evident delight at meeting her that she immediately suspected she had been the subject of discussion at Carnmore Hall. "My brother tells me you have a Hartley survey," Lord Gideon said, dealing cards with cheerful incompetence. "I do. He's been talking about it more than he realizes." Lord Gideon looked up with a grin entirely unlike his brother's contained expression. He told Peel it was the best current survey of the eastern boundary he had seen. How generous. He also said you were going to be difficult. Lord Gideon considered his hand. He meant it as a compliment. Difficult for Edmund means someone who has actually thought about their position. Most people haven't. I shall try to maintain the distinction, Cecilia said and played a card. The solicitors produced a preliminary agreement on the 17th of November, a framework for a joint drainage scheme, costs apportioned by boundary, rights of access stipulated. Greer sent it with a note suggesting she review it carefully. She reviewed it in 40 minutes, noted 2 clauses she wanted revised and sent her comments back. On the 21st she received a letter, not from Greer, the seal was Carnmore's. Miss Vane, I am informed by my solicitor that you have requested revisions to clauses 4 and 7. He has explained your reasoning. He is correct that your reading of clause 7 is the accurate one. I have instructed him to amend it accordingly. Regarding clause 4, the question of seasonal access rights, I wonder if you might be willing to discuss this directly, rather than at the remove of solicitors. My experience is that the third layer of correspondence rarely improves upon the first. I am at Carnmore Hall until the end of November. If you are willing to receive me, I should be grateful for an hour of your time. Yours faithfully, Carnmore. Cecilia read this twice. She noted the correction of clause 7 stated plainly and without qualification. She noted he had written directly rather than through channels. She wrote back the following morning. Your Grace, Thursday at 11 would suit. Yours faithfully, C. Vane. He came on Thursday at 11. Cecilia had the survey on the desk with clause 4 annotated in red ink, and a list of 3 questions she intended to put to him before the hour was out. Mrs. Foss, who had called on Wednesday and shown no inclination to leave until Cecilia mentioned the Duke's Thursday visit, had with remarkable convenience offered to call again Thursday morning, arriving at 10:30 with a basket of preserved plums and the transparent intention of being present when a duke came through the door. Cecilia accepted this arrangement without comment. Mrs. Foss was an excellent social fact. Edmund arrived precisely at 11. He came in, acknowledged Mrs. Foss with the natural ease of a man who had been navigating drawing rooms since boyhood, and set his copy of the preliminary agreement on the table. Clause 4, he said. Clause 4, Cecilia agreed. She gestured to the chair. Sit down, Your Grace. Mrs. Foss occupied the corner chair with her plum preserves and her knitting, and the studied incuriosity of a woman collecting every word. Edmund sat. He looked at Cecilia's annotations. Your objection is to the word unrestricted. My objection is to what unrestricted permits in practice. Unrestricted access across my eastern boundary for maintenance purposes is, in effect, unrestricted access at any time for any person your estate designates. I do not object to access for maintenance. I object to access without notice, without defined purpose, and without limit on personnel. Do you think I would abuse access rights? I think the clauses written would permit abuse, by you or by any future owner of the Carnmore estate. Land agreements outlast the good intentions of the people who signed them. He was quiet. Then, that is a sound objection. Thank you. What revision do you propose? She turned the annotated page toward him. He read it. Access upon 48 hours written notice, he read, save in the case of emergency flooding, when access may be immediate, but must be followed by written notice within 24 hours. Access party to consist of no more than 4 persons. Duration of access not to exceed 3 days per instance. If the work requires longer, a new notice must be given. You have thought about this? I thought about it before I purchased the field. These are standard protections in any easement arrangement. Standard protections for a buyer who anticipated needing them. For anyone who has dealt with neighbour disputes over access rights, she said, which I have in Wiltshire, a property I managed on behalf of a widowed friend. The neighbour was not unreasonable, but the access clause was. You managed an estate, he said. I assisted. She had no one else who understood property law and did not wish to sell. He looked at her with the careful quality she had noticed in him, direct without apparent judgment, but also without release. I will accept your revision, he said. Good. I have a revision of my own to Clause 9. She hadn't expected Clause 9, she found it. Quarterly review, she read. The agreement as written requires an annual review. I propose quarterly at minimum for the first 2 years. Drainage works of this kind frequently require adjustment in the early seasons. She read Clause 9 again. He was right. Quarterly was more appropriate. She was also aware that quarterly reviews meant quarterly meetings, and that this revision was either sound drainage management or something else, and she was not going to assume either. Who would conduct the review, she asked. I had assumed we would, given that we are the relevant parties. You and I. Unless you prefer to work through solicitors. Across the room, Mrs. Foss's knitting needles maintained their steady rhythm. Quarterly reviews, Cecilia said, beginning in March when the drainage work is complete. Yes. I will accept that revision. He wrote a note in the margin of his copy, she could not see what, and set down his pen. They went through the remaining clauses with the efficient calm of two people who had done this kind of work before. She proposed, he considered. He occasionally pushed back. She either held or amended. They moved on. It was the most useful negotiation she had conducted in 3 years. When they finished, the agreement was substantially better. She gathered her pages and he gathered his map, and there was a moment, brief, barely a moment, when both of them reached for the center of the table, and their hands were very close without touching. Neither commented on this. So you have a great many books, Edmund said, standing, looking at the shelves with the contained curiosity she had catalogued as simply his. 15 years of collecting. Any on drainage engineering? 1. A treatise on agricultural hydrology, 1798. A useful chapter on Yorkshire geology, though not comprehensive. I should like to borrow it. She found it without difficulty and held it out. He took it, opened the front cover and looked at her annotation in the margin of the frontispiece, a note about drainage coefficients on chalk-heavy soils. You have already worked through the calculations, he said. For my side of the boundary, the chapter on limestone drainage may be more applicable to your extension. He closed the book and looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize, the one he wore when he had encountered something that did not fit his prior model of the situation. Thank you, he said. I will return it. I know you will, Cecilia said. She meant it. She was not entirely sure why she was so certain, but she was. He returned the book on the 1st of December. He had read it. When she opened it, the frontispiece had 2 annotations in grey pencil beside hers. Narrow, precise handwriting. The first, coefficient wrong for limestone, CP47. The second, beside her own note on chalk-heavy soils, agreed. She stood in the doorway and looked at the annotations. You wrote in my book, she said. I didn't damage it. He looked mildly unrepentant. I had thoughts and the margins were available. In pencil, she noted, in case you wanted to erase them. She looked at him on her doorstep in the December cold, hat in hand, the first snow of the year sitting on the moor in an even grey-white sheet. He had ridden 2 miles in cold. He showed no sign of feeling. Come in, she said, before she had decided to say it. He came in. He took off his coat. Mrs. Aldgate, materializing from the kitchen with the timing of a woman who had been listening for the door, took it from him without ceremony and retreated. He sat in the chair by the fire, the same chair as before, she noted, and opened his copy of the preliminary agreement. Greer has incorporated the revisions, he said. I received the amended draft yesterday. You've reviewed it? Last night. It is acceptable. She came from the kitchen doorway. 1 observation. The access notice period is written as 48 hours from the date of the letter. I would prefer 48 hours from receipt. Post from Carnmore Hall may take a day. He paused. That is a reasonable distinction. It avoids a future argument. I'll have it corrected, he made a note. She made tea and brought it, and they sat on either side of the fire with the amended agreement between them and the annotated book on the side table and the snow quiet and white on the moor outside. An extremely domestic arrangement, she thought, for 2 people ostensibly in a property dispute. Your brother mentioned, she said, that you called me difficult. Edmund looked up. Gideon talks a great deal. He said you meant it as a compliment. I may have said something to that effect. To Peel, I believe, was the specific occasion. Yes, he said, it was. You did not expect a woman to know what Hartley's drainage calculations meant. He held her gaze. No, I did not. Because women don't understand land, Cecilia said. She said it with perfect equanimity, the way she would read a notation back from a document, accurately, cleanly, without inflection. Edmund went very still. He had not known she was there. She watched him process this, not with embarrassment, but with something that cost him more than embarrassment. He was a man who valued accuracy. He had just discovered he had been inaccurate where he was most certain of himself. "Miss Vane," he said. "I was in Mr. Greer's outer office. The partition is not as substantial as it appears." He said nothing for a moment. The fire was the only sound in the room. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes. Not only about you specifically." "No." He looked at the fire, then back at her, and the expression on his face was the revision she had been watching build across 6 weeks. Not complete, not simple, but visible. "I said it because I believed it. I have believed it for a long time. I am aware this makes the error larger, not smaller." "It does," she agreed, "but the acknowledgement makes it smaller again. Are you always this precise about fault?" "About most things, yes." Her pause. The snow outside the window was unchanged, even white, indifferent. "I owe you an apology," Edmund said. "You do. And I have been somewhat bested in every negotiation we have conducted. You held your own in Clause 6. "Clause 6, he agreed. He had been right about Clause 6, water rights in the event of a second blocked channel, and she had conceded it because he was correct, and there was no point in conceding more slowly than necessary. He almost smiled. This time it went further than almost, just enough to be unmistakable. It changed his face considerably. She had suspected it might. "I should like," he said, "to continue the quarterly reviews beyond the initial 2 years. Cecilia looked at him. "The agreement specifies 2 years. "I am aware. The drainage scheme, if done correctly, should not require quarterly review indefinitely." "No," Edmund said, "it should not." They looked at each other across the fire. "And we would need a reason," Cecilia said carefully, "to continue quarterly meetings after the scheme is stable." "Yes," he said, "and we would." She looked at the survey on her desk. She looked at the annotated book on the side table. She looked at him, already looking at her with the direct, unmanaged quality she had catalogued and still felt, every time, as something that required her to hold still. "I have the Hartley survey through the following year," she said. He marked 3 additional drainage points in the East Field worth monitoring. "That would justify quarterly meetings for at least another year. Possibly 2 if the monitoring is thorough." "I am in favor of thorough monitoring," he said. "I imagined you might be." The fire settled. Neither of them moved to fill the silence because the silence had become the kind that did not need filling. The agreement was signed on the 15th of December in Mr. Greer's office in Harrogate by both parties in person. This was slightly unusual. Such agreements were generally executed by solicitors on behalf of their clients. Both parties had, apparently, independently decided to be present. Greer, who had been a solicitor for 31 years, observed them in his office with the professional satisfaction of a man who understood that what he was witnessing was not entirely about the drainage scheme. He said nothing. He witnessed the signatures. He offered sherry, which Miss Vane declined and the Duke accepted. He showed them out together into the December street, where a light sleet had begun. They stood for a moment on the pavement, horses brought. "The first quarterly review will be in March," Cecilia said. "I will put it in my calendar." He settled his coat against the sleet. "Miss Vane, I have a library at Carnmore Hall, more comprehensive on agricultural engineering than your treatise, if you should find it insufficient." "Are you inviting me to use your library, Your Grace?" "I'm inviting you to visit Carnmore Hall," he said. "The library would be available to you." She looked at him in the December sleet. She thought about the morning she had chosen books over a man, 8 years ago, and had never been entirely sure she was right. She thought about the survey on her desk and agreed, in grey pencil in her margins. "I will come on Friday," she said, "with Mrs. Foss if she is willing." "Mrs. Foss is always welcome at Carnmore Hall," he said without missing a beat. "Then we will come anyway." She took her horse's reins, regardless of the weather. "The weather in Thornfield Vale," Edmund said, with the dry precision of a man who had lived in it his entire life, "never holds." She turned her horse south. He turned his north. In the grey December street neither of them looked back, which meant neither of them could see that the other one did. The weather did not hold. Friday arrived with a low sky and a wind off the moor that found every gap in every wall, and reminded the inhabitants of Thornfield Vale that the Vale had been here before them and would be here after, and had no particular interest in their comfort. Cecilia rode to Carnmore Hall anyway, as she had said she would on the reliable bay, in a wool riding habit the colour of charcoal. Mrs. Foss rode beside her on a smaller, more opinionated horse, wrapped in a travelling cloak and apparently impervious to the sleet. Cecilia had been past the gates of Carnmore Hall before on the road, in the way one was always past the gates of the dominant property in a small valley, unavoidably as a matter of geography. She had not been inside them. The drive was long and straight, bordered by oak trees that had been there long enough to have opinions, and the hall itself was the kind of building that had been added to by every generation without particular architectural consensus, and had somehow arrived at a coherence that none of its individual additions deserved. It was large, it was grey. It sat in the landscape as though it had grown there. A groom took their horses. A butler showed them in with the undemonstrative dignity of a man who had announced more important people than them and was not going to make them feel it. Edmund was in the entrance hall. He looked at the sleet on Cecilia's riding habit, and then at Mrs. Foss with the natural ease of a man who had been navigating drawing rooms since boyhood. Mrs. Foss. A pleasure. I have had the blue sitting room opened, if you would prefer a fire and something warm after the ride. Mrs. Foss accepted this arrangement with the gracious certainty of a woman who had engineered it. She was shown away. She did not look back at Cecilia, which was the most eloquent thing she had done all morning. "The library," Cecilia said. "This way," said Edmund. The library ran the length of the east wing, 2 stories of shelving connected by a narrow iron gallery, 4 long windows, a fireplace at each end. It smelled of old paper and wood smoke, and the faint mineral sharpness of the moor coming through the window frames. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "So you may browse freely," Edmund said. "I've had the agricultural engineering section flagged." Peel put markers in the relevant shelves. "How much of it is agricultural engineering?" "1 bay on the upper gallery. The rest is various." He moved to the far fireplace already lit. "There are 3 volumes on Yorkshire drainage specifically. 1 is more current than your treatise. The 3rd is a monograph by a surveyor named Haworth, privately printed, which Hartley recommended to me last year." Hartley recommended a monograph on Yorkshire drainage. She followed him in. "To you?" "He mentioned it when I commissioned the boundary resurvey." She stopped. "You commissioned a boundary resurvey?" "In November." He was at the fireplace, not looking at her. "After our first meeting at the field, it was apparent my estate documents were not current. I had Hartley return and complete a full resurvey of the eastern boundary." "And?" He turned. "Your document was accurate. The boundary wall is in the correct position. The 1801 survey had several errors." He paused. "I wanted to know for certain. I prefer to negotiate from accurate information." "As do I." "I know," he said. "That is why I told you." She held this for a moment, the simplicity of it. He had commissioned a resurvey not to challenge her position, but to verify it, and he was telling her because he considered her entitled to know. She went to the shelves and found the Haworth monograph, flagged as promised, and took it to the window. He did not hover. He went to his end of the library, sat and opened a document from the desk. She was aware of him the way one is aware of a fire in a cold room, not obtrusively but constantly, the warmth present at the edge of every other perception. She read for an hour. The Haworth monograph was excellent, specific, empirical, arranged by geological substrate rather than county, which was the correct arrangement for the chalk limestone transition that characterized the eastern edges of the vale. She made notes in her own notebook, not in Haworth's margins, because it was not her book. At some point Edmund moved to the upper gallery. She heard his footsteps on the iron walkway, the small sound of a volume drawn from a shelf, then a pause. "Miss Vane," he said from the gallery. She looked up. He was standing at the railing, holding a thin volume, the grey December light through the east windows putting him in partial shadow. "There is a chapter in Whitmore's Agricultural Correspondence on chalk drainage in the East Riding. The geology is not identical to Ember Flat, but it is the nearest analogue I have found for the coefficient problem." He held the book out over the railing. "The relevant chapter is marked." She crossed the room and took it from him. Their hands did not touch. The book passed between them the way the survey had, carrying more than its own weight. "The coefficient he proposes," Edmund said, still at the railing, "is higher than Hartley's standard figure. If we apply it to the extension, the channel width needs to increase by 6 inches. She opened to the marked chapter and read it. If the width increases by 6 inches, the construction cost on my side increases. By approximately £4, I've already costed it. She looked up at him. He looked back with the directness she had catalogued as simply his. I accept the revised coefficient, she said. Good. He came down from the gallery, returned to his chair and picked up his document. She returned to the window and Haworth, and the library resumed its particular quality of shared silence. 2 people reading in the same room as though they had always done it. At 2 o'clock, a maid brought a tray. Sandwiches, tea, a small plate of something with almonds. Simple. Not the elaborate presentation of a formal call, nothing arranged to impress. She appreciated this more than she would have appreciated the elaborate version. They sat at the small table near the fire. Your brother tells me you have 6 properties, she said. 7, if you count the London townhouse, which I sometimes do not. It requires more management than any of the others, and produces less in return. You dislike London. I dislike what London requires of me. He looked at his tea. The properties in Yorkshire, I understand. The work is legible, the results measurable. London requires one to perform activities whose purpose is entirely social and whose outcome is difficult to quantify. Marriage negotiations, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Among other things. He looked up. I have not been to London in 2 years. By choice? By preference. A pause. There was a situation 4 years ago, a woman, intelligent, charming. I allowed myself to be persuaded that her intelligence and charm were directed at me rather than at my position. He said it plainly, with no bid for sympathy. I was mistaken. I am sorry, Cecilia said. I mention it because it is relevant to how I have conducted myself in this negotiation, which has not always been to my credit. The dismissiveness. Yes, it was not aimed at you specifically. You had simply fallen into a category I had already decided upon. I was not without my own errors, she said. I expected you to want the outcome without engaging with the substance. Instead, I found someone who reads drainage monographs and annotates other people's treatises without asking permission. He almost smiled. Almost. And then he did. Not the contained flicker of the previous weeks, but a full, genuine smile, and it arrived with such unexpected warmth that she felt it the way one feels a door opening onto a bright room. She had known it would change his face. She had not anticipated by how much. She looked back at her tea. I chose books, she said after a moment. She had not planned to say it. She was saying unplanned things today with uncomfortable frequency. 8 years ago, there was a man who proposed to me. He was kind, respectable. I believe he was genuine in his attachment. She looked at the Haworth monograph on the table. I said no. I said no because I did not want to be a wife more than I wanted to be a reader and a thinker, and a person who made her own decisions about her own money and her own land. And, Edmund said, and I have not been entirely certain since then that I was right. She said it plainly, the most plainly she had ever said it to anyone. I have the books. I have the land. I have a study that is called a study, and I have done what I said I would do. She paused. I simply do not always know whether I chose correctly or whether I only chose defiantly. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the sleet had stopped and the moor was white and still. You knew what the field was worth before you bought it, he said. You knew what the survey would show before Hartley finished it. You knew what Clause 7 meant before my solicitor pointed it out. He looked at her steadily. That is not defiance. That is someone who knows precisely what she is doing and does it. She looked at him. That is a very generous interpretation. It is an accurate one. And accuracy, as you have observed, is more useful than generosity in most cases. He had used her own words back at her, precisely and without mockery. The effect was not what she would have predicted. Your Grace, she said. Edmund, he said. We have argued about drainage coefficients for 6 weeks. I think we are past, Your Grace. She looked at the fire. She looked at the survey in her bag. She looked at him. Edmund, she said. He said nothing. He did not need to. Then, Cecilia, quietly, as though testing the weight of it. The moor outside was white. The library held its silence. They finished their tea. She rode home in the late afternoon, Mrs. Foss beside her and admirably silent for the first half-mile, before saying with the contained satisfaction of a woman whose morning had gone exactly as intended, "He has very good taste in libraries." "He does," Cecilia said. "And in company, I think." Cecilia looked at the moor. You were in the blue sitting room. I was, with an excellent fire and a clear view of the drive. Mrs. Foss adjusted her cloak against the wind. You were in there for 4 hours, Cecilia. We were reading. Of course you were. A pause. He walked you to the door himself. He is courteous. He is, Mrs. Foss agreed warmly. He is also, I notice, the only person in the North Riding whose drainage calculations you find worth 4 hours of your Friday. Cecilia said nothing. My dear, Mrs. Foss's voice was gentler now without the wit. It is all right, you know, to find that the life you built has room for something you did not plan for. The moor stretched away on either side of the track, grey and enormous, indifferent to small human reckonings. Cecilia rode through it and thought about grey pencil in her margins. Agreed. I know, she said. I am working on believing it. Mrs. Foss nodded once and asked no further questions. January came in with iron cold and stayed. The drainage work began on the 12th, once the ground had softened enough for the initial digging. Cecilia's man Bates started from the west. The Carnmore team started from the boundary wall, working east. They would meet in the middle, extend the channel the requisite 20 yards and 4 inches at the revised 6-inch width, and connect it to the secondary brook along the field's southern edge. The logic was sound. The execution was cold and took longer than planned, because January and Thornfield Vale did not cooperate with agricultural schedules. Cecilia walked the progress every 2 days. On the 14th she found Edmund there. He was standing at the Carnmore boundary wall in working clothes. Actual working clothes, mud on the boots, a coat worn specifically for outdoor inspection, talking to the head of his drainage team. He saw her and did not look surprised. Bates is making good progress, she said, coming up beside him. The 2 channels were visible in the January morning, not meeting yet, a gap of perhaps 15 feet between them. The soil is harder than the survey suggested on the north side. We are a day behind. Bates is slightly ahead on the south. It may balance. He nodded. They walked the channel line together, a practical thing to check the grade and the connection points. Also, the 2 of them walking a field in January in the quiet that had developed between them, the quiet of people who had said enough significant things that the silences had weight. They stopped at the point where the 2 digs would eventually meet. 4 more days, she said, if the weather holds. He did not finish the sentence about the weather in Thornfield Vale. He was looking at the junction point, and something in his expression was not about drainage. Edmund, she said. He looked at her. January and the moor white around them, and his breath visible in the cold air, and he looked at her with the direct, unmanaged quality she had long since stopped trying to armor against. I should like to ask you something, he said. Before I ask it, I want to say that I am aware I began this acquaintance badly. I said something that was wrong, and I said it with certainty, which made it worse, and I have since October had cause to revise a position I should never have held. You have revised it, she said. I have observed the revision. I want to say it plainly regardless. I was wrong about land and women. I was wrong about you specifically and wrong about the category, and the error had a source in me that was not your fault and should not be your inheritance. She looked at him in the January field. The Carnmore men were working 40 yards away, and Bates was working 70 yards beyond them, and the moor was vast and indifferent, and she felt standing in it very specifically located. What were you going to ask? She said. He looked at the channel line. He looked back at her. Whether you would consider, whether there is any circumstance under which you would be willing to, whether the quarterly reviews might eventually encompass. He stopped. He who did not stumble over precision, who spoke in complete and considered sentences, stopped and looked at her with an expression entirely without armor. I have not done this well before, he said, the asking. No, she said, I don't imagine you have. Would you like more time? I have had 8 years, Cecilia said. I think that is sufficient. He went still. I am not going to sell you Emberflat, she said. That is not negotiable, and it has nothing to do with this. I know, he said. I'm not asking for the field. Good, she held his gaze. Ask me properly. Say what you mean. He was quiet for a moment, not the hesitation of a man who did not know, but of a man who understood that some things deserved to be said without haste. Cecilia, he said, I came to this field in October to manage a transaction. I had decided what you were before I met you, and I was wrong in every particular. And the process of being wrong. He paused. It has been the most alive I have felt in several years, You are unlike anyone I have known. You are precise and you are honest and you are kinder than you allow yourself to appear, and I find that I cannot think about the spring or the summer or any season after without thinking about you in it. He looked at her steadily. I would like, if you are willing, to ask for the right to think about you that way always. I would like to marry you, if you will have me. The wind crossed the field. Bates went on digging. The moor lay open in every direction. Cecilia looked at Edmund Ashworth and thought about the morning 8 years ago when she had chosen books and independence and the long, careful building of a life on her own terms. She had been right to choose it. She had built something true, and she was standing in it now, in her field on her terms, with a man who had come to take it from her and had instead simply learned to read the same maps. Yes, she said, I will have you. He crossed the distance between them in a single step, and she had one moment to note that he moved with the same purposeful economy he brought to everything. No performance, no hesitation. And then his hands were at her face, careful and certain, and he kissed her in the January field with the moor all around them, and Bates diplomatically finding something to inspect in the opposite direction. It was not a tentative kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had made a decision and was not interested in hedging it. When he drew back, he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, not the careful reserve, not the revision, not even the warmth of the library. Something quieter than all of those. Something that had been waiting behind all of those. The East Culvert, she said after a moment, because she needed to say something practical or she was going to do something undignified. He laughed. She had not heard him laugh before. It was a good laugh, not performed, not polished, simply real. Yes, he said, we should look at it. The boundary wall also. You replaced 3 sections in January. It needed doing. It was in adequate condition. He looked at her steadily. I wanted your boundary in good repair, he said. I make no apology for it. She looked at the wall, the new stone pale against the old, and then back at him. I noticed, she said. I did not say so. I know you noticed. He offered her his arm. The East Culvert. She took his arm, and they walked east across the field that was neither of theirs and both of theirs, in the January cold, with the channel running between them and the wall, and the moor, holding its long, indifferent silence around 2 people who had stopped being indifferent to each other some considerable time ago, and were only now saying so. Gideon found Edmund in the library that evening. Edmund was standing at the east window with a glass of port, and the expression of a man who had resolved something significant and was quietly taking stock of the resolution. You talked to her today, Gideon said. I asked her to marry me. Gideon was very still for a moment, then, and? She said yes. Gideon set down the book he had been carrying and sat in the nearest chair. Edmund. Yes. She said yes. I have just said so. To you. She said yes to you. Gideon appeared to require a moment. The woman who wouldn't sell you the field. She is still not selling me the field, Edmund said. That was made clear before the acceptance. Gideon stared at him. Then he began to laugh. Not politely, not briefly, but properly. The laugh of a younger brother who has waited a long time for his elder to do something right and is genuinely, extravagantly glad. Edmund watched him laugh with the expression of a man who found the response excessive and was not entirely displeased by it. She is remarkable, Gideon said when he had recovered. Yes, Edmund said, she is. You are going to have to tell Peel. I am aware. He will be baffled. He will adapt. Edmund looked at the east window, at the darkness of the moor beyond it. He generally does. Cecilia told Mrs. Foss on the 15th of January, in the front parlour over tea, in the standard manner of the Vale for all news of consequence. Mrs. Foss set down her cup with a precision that suggested she had been waiting for this for some weeks and had rehearsed her response. I see, she said. He asked me in the field, Cecilia said. We were reviewing the drainage progress. Naturally. Mrs. Foss picked up her cup again. And you said yes. I said yes. Before or after you discussed the East Culvert? Cecilia looked at her. After. Good, Mrs. Foss said. That is the correct order. She reached across and briefly took Cecilia's hand. My dear, I am very glad. Cecilia looked at the window, the January moor, the grey-white light. She thought about 8 years of correct decisions, and the one morning she had not been certain. She thought about grey pencil in her margins, and a boundary wall rebuilt without explanation, and a man standing in her field in the January cold saying, "I cannot think about any season after this without thinking about you in it." "So am I," she said, rather unexpectedly. "The best things usually are," said Mrs. Foss, and poured her more tea. They were married on the 14th of April, which was a Saturday, in the church at Thornfield Vale, that had been solemnizing the Ashworth family's significant occasions for 200 years. The village attended in the complete, satisfied way that small villages attend a marriage they have seen coming before the parties themselves did. The Reverend Marsh conducted the service with the unhurried dignity appropriate to the occasion. Gideon stood beside his brother and was the only person present who appeared to be in danger of displaying unseemly emotion, which he managed by studying the stonework with great intensity at the critical moment. Mrs. Aldgate in the third pew wore her good bonnet. Bates stood at the back in a coat that was clearly borrowed and did not mention the drainage channel once. Cecilia wore a dress the colour of cream wool, with a dark green spencer, and she walked to the altar with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, clear-eyed, self-possessed, not performing the occasion, but inhabiting it. When she reached Edmund, she looked at him directly, as she had looked at him in October in the garden, and in November over 2 maps, and in January in the cold field, and he looked back with the same steady, unmanaged directness she had catalogued and stopped cataloguing and simply relied upon. The Reverend Marsh said the words. They said the words back. When the register was signed, Cecilia examined it for a moment before adding her name, a habit of precision that made Gideon swallow a laugh in the pew behind them, and made Edmund, watching her, feel the particular warmth of a man who has understood at last that the habits he finds most endearing are the ones other people expect her to apologize for. She did not apologize. She signed and handed back the pen, and the thing was done. The first quarterly review of the drainage scheme, as Duchess of Carnmore, was conducted on the 15th of June. Not much had changed in the protocol. They still walked the channel with their respective notes. They still exchanged observations at the boundary wall. The Haworth coefficient was still correct, the culvert still clear, the northwest corner dry and green with new grass, and 12 sheep moving through it, with the comfortable indifference of animals who knew nothing about surveyors' maps or 6 weeks of careful negotiation. What had changed was that there was no pretense of the review being only about drainage. They had agreed on this tacitly, in the way they agreed on most things now, by neither of them suggesting otherwise, and both of them appearing quite satisfied with the arrangement. Edmund had brought both maps. He had taken to carrying them together since March, his old estate survey and her current one, rolled together and tied with both cords, which made an awkward bundle he carried anyway, because it was accurate, and because it was the first object in his life that was entirely the product of someone else's precision and his own willingness to be corrected by it. At the boundary wall in the June sun, he unrolled them both on the warm stone between them. "Hartley is doing the full estate resurvey in September," he said. "I know. He wrote to me for the Ember Flat data. I told him to." He looked at her survey, then at his own. "I'm going to ask him to incorporate both sets of observations in the final document." She looked at the 2 maps side by side. His older yellowed wrong in several particulars, hers clean, annotated, precise. 2 records of the same 12 acres. One from before, one from now, both true in their way, neither complete without the other. "Yes," she said, "there should be one map." He folded his hand over hers on the old survey. The sheep moved through the new grass, the channel ran. The June morning held them in the field in the sun, in the quiet particular, to a piece of ground that had been disputed and settled, and was now, simply, known. She reached into the document case and brought out her survey. The Hartley document, brown-corded, annotated in 3 inks, the paper soft at the creases from so many unrollings. She unrolled it one more time for the pleasure of looking at it in good light, and smoothed it flat on the wall. He read it over her shoulder. He had read it many times. He still read it as though there might be something new which she found she did not object to. "The Eastfield drainage points," she said. "The 3 Hartley marked in November. We should walk them before September." "Next review," he said, "August. I will put it in my calendar." He looked at her with the expression, the one she had watched develop over 6 months of maps and argument and grey December streets, the one that had no pretense in it and no performance, the one that was simply, uncomplicatedly his. She rolled up her survey and tied the cord. "The sheep are doing well," she said. "They are. The grazier asked whether you intended to expand the flock in spring. I am considering it. She tucked the survey under her arm. The northwest corner will support another 8 if the drainage holds. The drainage will hold, he said. He said it with the mild certainty of a man stating a category of fact, the same tone, the same precision, but pointing in an entirely different direction now. She looked at him. He knew she was thinking about October, about Greer's partition, about a notebook and a date and exact wording recorded for future use. He knew because she had told him, in December, in the library, after the 3rd time she had caught him reading the Howarth monograph with more attention than drainage strictly warranted. It will, she agreed. She took his arm and they walked back across the field, across Ember Flat, 12 acres of level ground between the Carnmore boundary and the Larkmore Brook, dry now and green and running correctly through its channel in the June light, belonging to both of them and to neither of them in the way that land at its best always belongs first to itself. The moor stretched away in every direction. It said nothing, as it always had. It held everything, as it always would. Behind them, on the warm stone of the boundary wall, the 2 maps lay side by side where they had left them. His older, hers newer, both true, both incomplete without the other, waiting to be carried home together.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment if you enjoyed the story.